She stepped out of the car slowly, her hands a little shaky as she looked up at the grand entrance of the luxury auction. The building glowed with golden lights, tall glass doors, and marble floors that reflected everything like water. She swallowed softly, feeling small for a moment, but she reminded herself that she was invited, that she had every right to walk inside. She wore a simple dress, neat and clean, not flashy or expensive, just something she felt comfortable in. Her hair was tied in a plain style, her jewelry minimal, and her shoes were ordinary. She looked nothing like the people who usually attended such events, but she told herself it did not matter. She was here because she wanted to see beautiful art, antiques, and rare items, not because she wanted attention or admiration. As she stepped inside, she noticed how different she looked from everyone else. Women in glittering gowns with diamonds around their necks raised their eyebrows at her. Men in expensive suits glanced at her with curiosity and confusion. She felt all those eyes on her, some sharp, some dismissive, some surprised, but she kept walking, trying to stay calm. The room sparkled like another world, chandeliers hung like stars, the walls were covered with velvet drapes, and waiters carried trays of champagne and delicate pastries. People gathered in small circles, laughing softly, showing off watches, handbags, and jewelry. The woman walked slowly, admiring a painting nearby. She felt a little out of place but also fascinated. She loved art even though she did not own expensive pieces. She enjoyed beauty in simple forms. She moved to another display, looking with bright and curious eyes. She did not notice the first whispers beginning behind her. She stood near a table where guests checked in, and the woman at the reception counter looked at her dress, then at her face, then at her invitation card. The receptionist forced a polite smile, the kind that did not reach her eyes. She asked if the woman was sure she was in the right place. The woman nodded gently, saying yes, her voice soft but clear. The receptionist hesitated, as if expecting the invitation to be fake, then finally allowed her inside. The woman walked farther into the hall, feeling the heavy air of wealth and pride around her. She saw guests holding bidding cards, discussing prices that sounded unreal to her ears. She heard numbers like 50,000, 100,000, and even more spoken casually like small amounts. She felt nervous but also curious. This world was strange, different, shiny, and cold. She spotted a beautiful antique music box on a polished platform, decorated with tiny stones and delicate carvings. She leaned closer to admire it, thinking how lovely it would sound if it still played. She smiled softly, enjoying the moment, but then she heard a laugh behind her, sharp and unpleasant, followed by a whisper that was not really a whisper. One woman said she must be lost, another said she looked like she came to clean the floors instead of attending. A third said the auction should check the guest list more carefully. The woman pretended she did not hear, but her heart squeezed tightly in her chest. She stepped away from the music box and moved to another section, hoping to escape the eyes that judged her. But the room was filled with the same looks, the same whispers, the same silent questions. Why was she here? Who invited her? Did she belong? She took a slow breath and reminded herself she was not doing anything wrong. She stood straight and continued walking. She saw a painting with soft colors, a landscape that reminded her of peace and childhood. She focused on it, trying to push away the feeling of being watched. A waiter approached with a tray. She reached politely to take a glass, but another woman nearby snatched one first and said loudly that the drinks were for guests, not outsiders. The waiter looked embarrassed. The woman felt a sting. She lowered her hand and stepped away. Her cheeks warmed, her chest tightened, but she kept her head up. She told herself she would not cry, not here, not in front of people who wanted her to feel small. She walked toward a quiet corner, hoping to breathe, but even there she could feel people staring. She wondered why simple clothes made her invisible to kindness. She wondered why wealth seemed to decide who deserved respect. She wondered if she should leave, but she remembered she wanted to enjoy the evening. She wanted to see the auction. She wanted to feel brave. She stood still for a moment and looked around again, seeing gold frames, rare sculptures, sparkling jewelry, and polished wood everywhere. She loved beauty, even if it did not belong to her. Even if others thought she did not belong near it. She whispered to herself that life was not measured by dresses or diamonds. She tried to gather courage, but the room felt heavy and she felt alone. She reached into her small handbag and touched her phone, just to feel something familiar, something grounding. She thought of her husband, his gentle voice, his warm smile, his way of seeing worth where others did not. She wished he were there. She wished someone, anyone, would treat her like a human, not a mistake that wandered into the wrong world. And as she stood in that glittering room full of strangers, she had no idea that everything was about to change, that the night would not end in humiliation, but in shock, silence, and a reversal none of the socialites could ever forget. She stayed near the edge of the room, hoping the whispers would fade, but they only grew louder. The elite socialites watched her like she was a stain on their perfect evening. Their eyes sparkled with jewels and cruelty at the same time. One woman in a shimmering silver dress pointed at her and laughed softly, pretending to cover her mouth. Another man leaned toward his group and joked that she must have wandered in from the street. The group burst into quiet giggles, trying to hide it but not really trying at all. The simple woman pretended to study a vase, but the sting of their mockery pressed against her heart. She felt their voices like needles, sharp and cold. She tried to breathe slowly, reminding herself that she belonged here. She had an invitation, she was a guest. But their eyes kept telling her she was an intruder. The auction hall filled with murmurs, the kind that travel across a room even when spoken softly. People glanced at her dress, her shoes, her plain hairstyle, judging every inch of her without knowing a single thing about her life. She heard someone say she must be a server who got lost. Another said she probably came hoping for free food. These words wrapped around her like chains, making her feel smaller with each second. She moved toward a sculpture made of crystal and gold, hoping for a moment of peace. But two women stepped closer, blocking her view. One of them said loudly that items like these were not for people who shop in discount stores. The other laughed and nodded, their diamonds sparkled under the lights, but their hearts felt dull and harsh. The woman lowered her gaze and stepped back, her cheeks burning, her throat tight. She wished she could disappear. She wished she had never come. She wished kindness existed in rooms like this. People continued to gather around her, whispering behind fans, behind glasses, behind hands. Their voices slid through the air like poison. She tried to move away again, but a tall man with a polished suit stopped her. His smile was thin, sharp, and fake. He asked her if she was lost. His tone carried the weight of insult, not concern. She said quietly that she was here for the auction. He raised an eyebrow and asked if she understood how expensive the items were. His friends chuckled behind him. She nodded again, trying to stay calm, trying to stay polite. He leaned closer and told her that this event was for people who belonged to a certain class. His voice was low but loud, enough for others to hear. The humiliation spread through her like cold water. She stepped away, holding her handbag like a shield. Her heartbeat thudded in her ears, drowning out the soft music and elegant laughter around her. She moved toward another section of the hall, but the mocking eyes followed her. No matter where she went, whispers chased her. Some people glanced and looked away quickly, others stared boldly, enjoying her discomfort. She felt the weight of judgment settle on her shoulders, heavy and unfair. A waiter approached again, but this time his hands shook slightly. He offered her a drink, but before she could accept, a woman in a sparkling red gown placed a hand on the waiter's arm and told him not to waste the champagne. The simple woman stepped back again, her fingers trembling. She felt an ache deep inside, the ache of being unseen, unheard, unvalued. She wondered why people believed wealth granted them permission to be cruel. She wondered if anyone in the room knew how to be gentle. Suddenly the auctioneer announced that the first item would be presented. People moved forward, forming a cluster of glittering silk and polished shoes. The simple woman stayed behind them, not wanting to be mocked again. Someone turned and told her she should watch from the back, where people like her fit better. The words pierced her heart. She swallowed her pain and nodded. She stood alone as the auction began. Her eyes blurred, but she refused to cry, not here. Not in front of people who wanted her tears. She tried to focus on the auctioneer's voice, but the laughter and whispers echoed louder in her mind. She thought of her husband again, wishing for his steady presence, his warm reassurance, his calm strength. She reached into her purse and touched her phone, not to call yet, just to feel like she had a lifeline. She knew if she dialed his number he would answer, he would listen, he would care. But she wanted to be strong, she wanted to endure on her own just a little longer. She lifted her chin and stood straighter, trying to reclaim a tiny piece of dignity, but the whispers returned, louder now, crueler now. The elite socialites smirked at her, believing she was powerless, believing she was alone, believing she had no one to defend her. They had no idea how wrong they were. They had no idea who her husband was. They had no idea how quickly their world would shatter. The simple woman breathed slowly, unaware that the night was about to shift, unaware that humiliation would soon turn into silence, respect, and shock, unaware that the cruel whispers would soon freeze in the air when the truth arrived, unseen but unstoppable, inching closer with every passing second. She stood near the back of the auction hall, hoping the attention would move away from her, but the humiliation only grew stronger. The elite socialites seemed to find joy in targeting her, as if mocking her made them feel taller, prettier, richer, and more important. One woman with a pearl necklace turned her head and looked at her with a smirk, then whispered loudly enough for others to hear that charity events must have lowered their standards. Another man pretended to trip near her and said he almost mistook her for staff because of her plain appearance. Laughter followed, soft but sharp like broken glass. The simple woman felt her stomach twist. She tried to breathe slowly, telling herself she would not react, not break, not show pain, but it was getting harder with every insult. The auctioneer presented a diamond bracelet next. Sparkling under the lights like frozen stars, the simple woman admired it silently, not because she wanted to buy it but because she appreciated its craftsmanship. But the moment she leaned forward even slightly, a group of women nearby burst into mocking giggles. One said she must be dreaming, another said she probably thought the bracelet cost $20. A third added that touching it might get fingerprints on perfection. The simple woman stepped back quickly, her cheeks burning, her heart trembling. She felt like a shadow in a room full of bright and cruel lights. The socialites continued their cruel game. One of them waved a bidding paddle dramatically and then glanced at the simple woman, saying people like her should watch auctions on television instead. The humiliated woman lowered her head, trying to hide the pain in her eyes. She wondered why kindness was so rare. She wondered why people who had everything still needed to crush others. She wondered why looking ordinary made her a target. The whispers grew louder, spreading across the room like smoke. A young woman with golden earrings said the simple woman must have sneaked in. Another said she probably forged her invitation. Someone suggested security should check her bag. The simple woman felt tears rising but forced them back. She refused to let them see her cry. She held onto her handbag like it was the last piece of strength she had left. She moved toward a quieter corner, hoping to breathe, but two men blocked her way. One of them smiled coldly and asked if she was lost. The other asked if she was waiting for the cleaning crew. Their words cut deeper than the laughter. The simple woman whispered that she was just here to watch the auction, but they rolled their eyes and walked away, leaving her frozen in place. She stared at the floor, wishing it would open and swallow her. She thought about leaving, stepping outside, escaping the cruelty, but something inside her told her to stay. She reminded herself she was invited. She reminded herself she had a right to be here. She reminded herself she mattered, even if no one in this glittering room believed it. Then came the moment that broke her, completely and painfully. A rare antique necklace was brought onto the stage, delicate and beautiful. The simple woman smiled softly, remembering a similar necklace her grandmother once wore. She took a step closer, wanting only to admire it, but a woman with red lips and diamonds dripping from her ears laughed loudly and said the simple woman must think it belonged in a thrift shop. The room chuckled. The simple woman felt her heart crack. She whispered a soft apology even though she did nothing wrong. The auctioneer paused, sensing tension, but continued as if nothing happened. The simple woman backed away, her eyes stinging, her breath unsteady, her chest tight. She could not take it anymore. She walked toward the side hallway where the noise faded slightly. She leaned against the wall and closed her eyes, trying to steady herself. It felt like the world had shrunk around her, heavy and suffocating. She reached into her handbag and pulled out her phone. Her hands trembled, not from weakness, but from holding in too much pain for too long. She stared at the screen, wondering if she should call her husband. She did not want to bother him. She did not want to sound dramatic. She did not want to admit she was hurting, but the memory of his calming voice filled her mind. She needed someone who saw her differently, someone who valued her, someone who reminded her she was enough. She pressed the call button. Her husband answered immediately, his voice warm, steady, and full of concern. She tried to speak, but her voice broke. He listened quietly as she told him what happened. The whispers, the laughter, the humiliation, the cruelty. He stayed silent for a moment, long enough for her to fear he was angry or disappointed. But when he finally spoke, his voice was calm and firm. He told her to stay where she was. He told her not to leave. He told her he was coming. She wiped her eyes, breathing slowly. His words wrapped around her like safety. She returned to the auction hall, still shaken, still bruised inside, but now she carried a small spark of strength again. The socialites continued their insults, unaware that everything was about to change, unaware that their laughter was moments away from freezing in their throats, unaware that the man walking toward the entrance of the auction hall was not just her husband, but a millionaire whose presence would turn the entire night upside down and expose every cruel heart in the room, one stunned breath at a time. She walked back into the hall slowly, her heartbeat still unsteady, but something inside her felt different now. The humiliation was still there, sitting heavy in her chest, but she was no longer alone. Her husband's voice echoed in her mind, calm and steady, telling her to stay where she was, telling her he was coming, telling her she did not have to endure this by herself anymore. She wiped the last trace of tears from her eyes and lifted her chin, even though her hands still trembled. Slightly, the elite socialites noticed her return and smirked again, thinking she had come back to be mocked further. They whispered like snakes in silk. One of them pointed and said she must have gone to call a taxi because she realized she did not belong. Another said she probably cried in the bathroom because she could not handle being around real wealth. Their laughter floated across the room like poison perfume. The simple woman heard it but did not break this time. She held on to her husband's promise like a lifeline, The auctioneer continued presenting rare items, paintings, sculptures, and jewels, but the woman barely heard the bids. Her focus split between the pain of the room and the hope that help was on its way. She stood near the edge again, ignoring the stares, trying to breathe through the ache in her chest. Then her phone buzzed softly in her hand. She looked down and saw a message from her husband. Just 4 words that changed everything inside her. "I am here now." Her breath caught, her eyes widened. She slowly turned her head toward the grand entrance of the auction hall. And there he was, walking inside with calm confidence, his steps steady, his posture relaxed, his expression composed. He did not wear flashy clothes, he did not shine like the jeweled elites, but his presence filled the room in a way none of them could. The simple woman felt her knees weaken, not from fear, but from relief so strong it almost overwhelmed her. The socialites noticed the shift in her gaze and turned to see who she was looking at. They assumed he was another ordinary man, maybe someone coming to take her home, but then something happened. The security guard straightened when they saw him, the event coordinator's eyes widened, the auction host froze mid-sentence. A murmur spread through the room, quiet but sharp, like electricity passing from one person to another. The millionaire husband walked straight toward his wife, not glancing left or right, not acknowledging the glittering crowd, only seeing her, only caring about her. When he reached her, he placed his hand gently on her back and asked softly if she was all right. His voice carried warmth, protection, and affection. The room went silent. The socialites stared, confused, unsettled, uncertain. One of them forced a smile and asked who he was, trying to sound superior. He turned his head and looked at her with calm eyes, the kind that held silent power. The woman who mocked him felt her confidence melt. Then one of the event organizers hurried over, speaking nervously, addressing him by name, a name known in wealthy circles, a name that carried influence, investments, and respect. The socialites gasped softly. Several recognized it. Some had heard it in financial magazines, others in private society gossip. The man they mocked by mocking his wife was not just wealthy, he was someone whose presence mattered. Someone whispered that he funded part of the auction house. Another whispered that he owned properties many guests admired. A third said she once tried to get an invitation to one of his private galas and was rejected. The room shifted like the ground had moved beneath their feet. The auctioneer stopped speaking entirely, waiting for direction. The millionaire husband turned to the organizers and asked in a calm voice who had insulted his wife. His tone was steady, not angry, but strong enough to make the air feel heavy. The organizers paled, the socialites froze. One tried to pretend she had said nothing, another tried to smile sweetly as if she had been kind, another stepped backward as if distance would erase her cruelty. The millionaire husband did not raise his voice, he did not need to, his presence alone demanded change. He asked for the event director, and within seconds the director appeared, anxious and sweating. The husband spoke quietly, explaining what happened. The director apologized immediately, stumbling over words. He promised that such behavior was unacceptable. He promised that action would be taken. The simple woman watched in disbelief. She never asked for revenge, she never wanted power, she only wanted dignity, and yet here she was, standing beside a man whose calm strength shifted the entire room. People who once mocked her now stood silent, stiff, unsure, afraid to meet her eyes. They had no idea that the moment they judged her, they had judged the wrong person, and now the night was no longer theirs. The balance had changed, and the consequences were only beginning. The room seemed to hold its breath as the millionaire husband stood beside his wife. His calm presence felt louder than the laughter that had filled the hall earlier. The elite socialites who mocked her now shifted uncomfortably, their confidence cracking like thin ice. The auction director, still sweating, tried to regain control of the event, but the atmosphere had already changed. Respect had entered the room, and humiliation had begun to reverse. The husband gently asked his wife if she wanted to leave, but she shook her head softly, surprising even herself. She did not want to run anymore. She did not want to be pushed away from a space she had every right to stand in. The husband nodded, understanding her strength without needing words. He placed his hand in hers, and the gesture alone sent a powerful message through the room. The socialites watched, stunned, unsure how to react. One woman with diamond-covered wrists tried to smile and said she had never meant any offense, but her voice shook. Another man who had mocked her earlier stepped forward and claimed it was all a misunderstanding. The millionaire husband looked at them briefly, and they fell silent, ashamed. The auctioneer cleared his throat and announced the next item, hoping to resume normalcy, but nothing felt normal anymore. People who once stood proudly now seemed uncertain, glancing between the couple and the bidding stage. The next item was a rare painting, elegant and shimmering under the lights. The bidding began, voices calling out prices with forced excitement. But then something unexpected happened. The millionaire husband lifted a bidding paddle. The room froze. Everyone knew that when he bid, It would not be small. The auctioneer's voice shook slightly as he acknowledged the bid. Others hesitated, then tried to compete, calling out higher amounts, but the husband raised the paddle again, calm and casual, doubling the number without blinking. Gasps spread through the hall. The competitors fell silent. The auctioneer declared the painting sold to him. The husband nodded once, then turned to his wife and asked if she liked it. She stared at him, surprised, and said she only thought it was beautiful to look at, not to own. He smiled gently and said beauty belonged with someone who could appreciate it with a sincere heart. The socialites stared, realizing something they had never considered. True wealth was not loud, not cruel, not glittering. True wealth stood quietly, confident without needing to prove anything. The next item was presented, a vintage brooch made of sapphires and gold. The woman who previously mocked the simple woman leaned closer to her group and whispered that surely she would not dare approach it. But before the whisper finished, the husband raised the bidding paddle again, his voice calm as he declared a number that emptied the room of competition. The brooch was his. He handed it to his wife without ceremony, not to show off, but because he remembered her telling him once that her grandmother used to wear sapphire jewelry. The simple woman felt tears touch her eyes again. But these were different. They were soft, grateful, full of emotion instead of humiliation. A man who insulted her earlier stepped forward, trying to speak, maybe to apologize, maybe to save face, but the event director stopped him. The director announced loudly that guests who behaved disrespectfully toward others would be escorted out. Several heads turned, including the offenders, their faces paled. Security approached discreetly. The woman in the red gown, who laughed the loudest earlier, protested weakly, but no one supported her now. The auction crowd watched in silence as she and others were removed from the hall. Not by anger, but by consequence. The simple woman stood still, stunned, never imagining things would go this far. The husband leaned close and whispered that he did not ask for them to be removed, but the event chose to protect its reputation. She nodded slowly, absorbing everything. The hall felt lighter now, not because of wealth, but because cruelty had lost its place. People approached her differently now. Some with respect, some with admiration, some with genuine kindness. A woman with soft eyes told her she loved how she carried herself. A man said he respected her grace under pressure. The simple woman listened politely, but her heart stayed humble. She did not feel triumphant. She felt seen, finally seen. The auction continued, but the energy was changed. It was no longer a room of superiority, but a room learning a lesson. And at the center of it stood a woman who came in quietly, endured humiliation silently, and now stood with dignity, not because of wealth, but because she refused to let cruelty define her. The night was not over, but the shift was complete. The elites would never forget it, and neither would she, because for the first time that evening, she felt not like a stranger in a glittering world, but like a woman who belonged wherever she chose to stand. The auction moved into its final hour, but the atmosphere was completely transformed. The simple woman now stood beside her husband, no longer shrinking, no longer hiding. The room that once made her feel small now felt strangely quiet, almost cautious, as if everyone feared making the wrong move. The elite socialites who remained wore forced smiles, trying to rewrite their behavior in silence. Some approached her with compliments, others pretended they had never mocked her, but she could still feel the memory of their laughter echoing beneath their polished voices. The auctioneer announced a rare antique mirror next, framed in gold with delicate carvings of roses and vines. The simple woman admired it, not for its price or prestige, but because the reflection in it looked soft and warm, not sharp like the gazes that once cut her. Her husband noticed the way her eyes lingered and asked gently if she wanted it. She hesitated, saying she only liked how peaceful it looked, not because she wanted to own it. He nodded, and without another word, raised the bidding paddle again. The hall fell silent as he offered a number far beyond what anyone expected. No one dared to compete. The mirror was his. The auctioneer's voice trembled slightly as he declared it sold. The husband told the staff to have it delivered to their home and hung where sunlight could touch it. The woman felt her heart warm, not because of the gift, but because he saw her, truly saw her. The socialites watched, stunned, realizing that love looked nothing like the glittering jewels around their necks. It looked quiet, steady, generous, and kind. Then the event director approached the couple again, his posture respectful and careful. He announced that the organization wished to honor them with a private preview of upcoming auction collections. The simple woman looked startled. She shook her head softly, saying she did not need special treatment. But the director insisted, his voice humble, saying the evening had revealed important flaws in how guests were treated. He said change would begin immediately, starting tonight. The socialites nearby listened, uncomfortable, realizing that their behavior was the catalyst for this reform. One woman who had mocked the simple woman earlier stepped forward and tried to apologize. Her voice wavered as she said she did not mean to hurt anyone. The simple woman listened, but her heart felt uncertain. Apologies spoken out of fear never carried the weight of sincerity. She nodded politely but did not pretend to forget. Another socialite attempted to compliment her dress, trying to rewrite the memory of her earlier insults. The simple woman simply smiled and turned away, choosing peace over revenge. The crowd felt the shift. The power was no longer in diamonds, status, or arrogance. It stood quietly beside the millionaire, held gently in the hands of the simple woman who never raised her voice, never returned cruelty, never needed to prove anything. The auction moved toward its final item, an exquisite sculpture carved from white marble, shaped like two hands holding a single flame. The symbolism was impossible to ignore, strength and gentleness together. The auctioneer spoke with reverence, saying it represented unity, resilience, and enduring spirit. The simple woman stared at it, feeling its meaning settle inside her. She did not want to own it, but she respected it deeply. Her husband noticed again and smiled, but he did not bid. Instead he leaned close and whispered that some beauty should be admired, not possessed. She nodded, touched by his wisdom. The sculpture was sold to another guest, but many in the room glanced at the simple woman, knowing she embodied its meaning more than anyone else. As the evening drew to a close, the staff prepared to escort the couple out, not as a formality, but as an honor. Guests stepped aside, creating a clear path. The same walkway she entered through with nerves and uncertainty now felt like a corridor of acknowledgement. The light seemed softer, the air warmer, even the marble floors reflected her steps differently. She and her husband walked hand in hand toward the exit. But before they reached it, the director stopped them once more. He announced quietly that new rules would be implemented. Guests would be treated equally regardless of appearance or status. Staff would receive training in dignity and respect. Discrimination would no longer be tolerated. The simple woman felt her breath catch. She never imagined her pain would spark change. She never imagined her silence would turn into a lesson for an entire room. She never imagined the humiliation she endured would transform into growth, not just for herself, but for others. As they stepped outside into the cool night air, the stars above seemed brighter. The millionaire husband opened the car door for her, and she sat down gently, feeling lighter than she had all evening. He joined her and took her hand again. She whispered that she did not need luxury, grand halls, or expensive things. She only needed respect. He smiled and said she carried respect within her, and anyone who failed to see it only revealed their own emptiness. The car pulled away, leaving behind the glittering building, the quiet murmurs, the shocked faces, and the unforgettable lesson. And in that moment, the simple woman realized something powerful. True elegance was not in wealth, clothing, or jewels. It was in kindness, humility, and courage. The elites tried to strip it from her, but instead, she revealed how truly poor they were. And as the city lights passed by, she knew the night would be remembered, not for the auction, but for the moment dignity reclaimed its place and refused to bow ever again. The ride home was quiet and gentle, but inside the simple woman's heart, emotions moved like soft waves. She watched the city lights glide past the window and felt a strange mixture of relief, disbelief, and newfound strength. The humiliation she experienced still lingered like a shadow, but something brighter now stood in front of it, dignity rediscovered. Her husband glanced at her from time to time, checking if she was all right without asking aloud. He knew she needed space to breathe, to process, to settle her feelings. When they arrived home, he opened the door for her once again, the same way he always did, not as a performance but as a habit of love. She stepped inside and removed her shoes slowly, her feet aching from standing tense for so long. The house felt safe, warm, and peaceful, far away from jeweled stares and poisonous whispers. Her husband asked if she wanted tea and she nodded softly. They sat together at the table, the steam rising gently from their cups. She finally spoke, her voice quiet and thoughtful. She told him how small she felt, how the laughter pierced her, how the stares made her shrink inside herself. He listened without interrupting, his eyes steady and full of understanding. When she finished, he reached for her hand and told her something she never expected to hear. He said he admired her strength. He said staying calm in the face of cruelty required more courage than shouting back. He said she showed more class than the entire room combined. The woman felt her throat tighten, not with sadness, but with emotion she had held back for hours. She leaned her head against his shoulder and let herself rest there, feeling safe, protected, valued. After a while, her phone buzzed with notifications. She hesitated before looking, worried it might pull her back into the memory of the night. But when she checked, she saw messages from people who had been at the auction. Some said they were ashamed of how others treated her. Some apologized for staying silent. Some said watching her remain calm inspired them. The woman blinked in surprise. She never expected anyone to notice her strength. She thought she only looked scared and small. Her husband smiled when he saw her expression and told her that true strength is often quiet. Later that evening, They sat together on the couch, the room dim and peaceful. The woman thought about the moment her husband walked into the auction hall, about how the room shifted, about how the socialites who once laughed now stood frozen like statues. She asked him how he stayed so calm. He replied softly that power does not need to shout to be heard. She thought about that for a long moment, letting the meaning settle inside her. She realized she had learned something precious, something she would carry for the rest of her life. That evening, before going to sleep, she stood in front of the mirror, not the golden one from the auction, but the simple one in her home. She looked at her reflection, the same simple dress, the same plain hair, the same gentle face. But now she saw something new in her eyes. She saw strength, quiet but unshakable. She saw dignity, not borrowed from wealth, but born from within. She saw a woman who endured cruelty without losing kindness. She saw a woman who stayed soft without breaking. She saw a woman who walked into a world that tried to belittle her, and walked out with her head held higher than before. The next morning, the sun lit the room with a warm, golden glow. She woke up feeling lighter, her chest no longer tight, her heart no longer trembling. Her husband was already awake, reading messages from the auction director. The director announced that new policies were being written, that staff would be trained to treat all guests equally, that socialites with a history of elitist behavior would no longer receive automatic invitations. The woman listened with surprise. She never imagined her pain would lead to change outside her own life. She never imagined others would learn from what happened. Her husband told her that sometimes life chooses quiet people to teach loud lessons. They decided to go for a walk, to feel fresh air, to let the world feel normal again. As they walked hand in hand, strangers passed them without knowing who they were, without knowing what happened, without knowing what lesson had been born the night before. And for the first time since the auction, the simple woman smiled freely, knowing that respect was not something given by others, but something she carried with her, always quietly shining, no matter who tried to dim it. The days that followed felt calmer, but something inside the simple woman had changed forever. She moved through her daily routines with a new sense of steadiness, a quiet confidence that had not been there before. When she walked into a shop, she stood a little straighter. When she spoke to strangers, her voice felt clearer. She no longer worried about being judged by her clothes, her appearance, or her gentle nature. She began to understand that dignity was not something people could take from her unless she allowed it. One morning she sat on the balcony with her tea, watching the sunlight stretch across the garden, and she thought about the night at the auction. She remembered the whispers, the mocking smiles, the laughter that cut like knives, but she also remembered how she stood her ground, how she stayed kind even when others were cruel, and how her husband arrived like a calm storm that changed everything without raising his voice. She smiled softly, realizing the night had shown her who she truly was, not weak, not small, but quietly strong. Later that day, a letter arrived from the auction house, not an email, but a formal handwritten letter sealed in an envelope. The handwriting was elegant and the tone sincere. The letter apologized once again for the humiliation she endured, but it also explained something new. The auction house announced the creation of a new guest policy inspired by her experience. Guests would no longer be judged by appearance. Everyone would receive equal respect upon entry, and staff would receive training to recognize and stop elitist behavior. The woman felt a warm ache in her chest as she read. She never expected her painful experience to create change for others. She felt grateful, humbled, and strangely proud. Her husband read the letter with her and told her that change rarely begins with loud people. It begins with gentle souls who refuse to disappear. That afternoon they went for a walk in the city. The air was cool and fresh, and people passed them without knowing who they were, without knowing what happened, without knowing the lesson the woman had carried into the world. At a small cafe, the woman stood in line to order tea. A well-dressed woman in front of her dropped her wallet. The simple woman picked it up and handed it back with a kind smile. The woman looked surprised, then grateful, and thanked her warmly. That small moment felt like healing, kindness given without judgment. Later that evening, the simple woman sat by the window as the sky turned purple and blue. She thought about the socialites who mocked her, wondering if they learned anything, wondering if their hearts changed even a little. She realized she would probably never know, but that did not matter. The lesson was not for them alone. It was for her, for anyone who ever felt small, unseen, or dismissed. It was a reminder that worth does not shine from diamonds. It glows from character, from gentleness, from resilience. As night settled softly, her husband joined her and asked what she was thinking. She told him she finally understood something important. She said the auction hall did not make her feel unworthy. The people in it tried to, but they failed in the end, because her worth never depended on their approval. Her husband smiled and kissed her forehead, saying he always knew that, and now she knew it too. They sat together in the quiet house, the world outside calm and distant. The simple Woman closed her eyes for a moment and imagined walking into another grand room someday. She imagined holding her head high, not because of wealth, not because of power, but because she understood who she was. She imagined greeting the world with kindness, knowing that anyone who mocked her only revealed their own emptiness. And in that gentle moment, she realized the true ending of her story was not the humiliation, not the shock, not even the power shift. The true ending was the beginning of a new understanding, a new strength, a new peace. She stood, took her husband's hand, and walked toward the softly lit living room, ready for whatever life would bring next, knowing she would never again shrink herself to fit inside someone else's expectations. She would walk forward as she was, simple, strong, and filled with quiet grace that no one could ever take away.